welcome. We're going to attempt today to do, I'm a little bit unsure if we're going to land up doing more than one of the Mishnahs today. So we'll see, we'll try, okay? There's two Mishnahs in a row, and on the one hand, there's the opportunity to go through both of them in a day. On the other hand, there might be a lot of information to get through. So let's see how we go. The first thing I'm going to do is pull up the Mishnah on the screen. Sancheiriv, right? That's the person we're interested in. What happened to Sancheiriv? So Sancheiriv, as we know, was one of the most horrific people in our history. He's a villain of the highest order. Okay? So what's that got to do with our Mishnah? So we got a guy called Sancheiriv, and he's a bad guy, and he did terrible things. Okay, fine. I mean, it's a nice piece of history. What has it to do with our Mishnah? Well, the Gemara tells us that Shemaiah and Avtalion were descendants of Sancheiriv. Now, there's an interesting thing. You talk about yichus, people often boast about the yichus, where do you come from? My grandfather was the rabbi of the shtetl. My great-grandfather was the shoichet or the chazan, or who knows what. People are always boasting about their yichus. There's an old saying amongst Jews that yichus is like an onion. The best part is underground. In other words, okay, so you got yichus, big deal, but who are you, So very often people get very caught up in their pedigree and where they come from and who their grandparents were and so on and so forth. It's very interesting then to come across people of this caliber, such great sages as Shemaiah and Avtalion, and to discover that they had the opposite of yichus. Who was your Zayda? Oh, my Zayda was Sancheiriv. You know what I mean? It's not exactly the greatest thing to put onto your shidduch CV. So why does the Gemara point this out to us? Now, we know that in that period of history, the early Talmudic period, the time of the Mishnah, we do know that there were a number of people who had spotty pedigree like this. Rabbi Akiva was one of them. Rabbi Akiva, we're told, Ben Gerim, he was the descendant of converts. Rabbi Meir, right? Rabbi Meir was also one as well, where Rabbi Meir actually, according to some opinions, when it says, Mi bnei banov shel Haman, the great-grandchildren of Haman, I mean, you don't get more wicked than Haman, taught Torah in Bnei Brak. So some people say that's where Rabbi Meir came from. Either way, there were a number of people who were leading lights in the Talmudic world who came from that kind of background. Shemaiah and Avtalion are, in a sense, the most famous of the lot. In fact, there were some people who looked askance at them, who are you and how do you, and where do you come from? I'm sure you can appreciate that is something that unfortunately happens today as well in our society. Who are you? Where do you come from? So Shemaiah and Avtalion, if nothing else, educate us about the respect that we're supposed to have for the person who goes through the conversion process. Now, the Gemara has a very harsh thing to say about conversion. Very harsh. The Gemara says that kosher lahem geirim leyisrael kesapachas, which means sapachas is one of the kinds of impurity of tsaras. Remember, tsaras was that biblical affliction that people used to have. It was like a skin disease that you used to get, and it made a person impure, and then they had to be quarantined. And I know a lot of people feel that right now this is very familiar, kind of feels you have to announce to everybody that I'm impure and don't come near me because you don't want to get contaminated. So it sounds a little bit contemporary at the moment. So sapachas is one of the variations of how tsaras, how this particular skin rash could manifest itself. So the Gemara makes a very harsh statement and says that the converts are difficult for the Jewish people like sapachas. Well, what are you talking about? In our Torah, we know that you have to give the greatest respect to a ger, to somebody who converts. There are 4 prohibitions that a person could transgress if you mistreat a ger. That's worse than if you mistreat your fellow ordinary born Jewish fellow Jew. So what does this mean? Because sapachas, it's like such a difficult thing. Unfortunately, what we do know is this. We know that not every person who goes through the conversion process necessarily is able to sustain it. That's where life becomes difficult, you see. Because if a person was not Jewish and they did not fulfill mitzvahs, big deal. No harm. Nobody asked you to fulfill them. But if a person comes and converts and goes through the process and makes that commitment and makes that transition and now has the status of Jewish And then it turns out afterwards that actually this wasn't for me. And I'm not able to sustain it. They were in a far worse off position than they were had they never become Jewish in the first place. So that's why there's always this concern, what happens to a person who goes through the process and maybe had good intentions, but they were unable to sustain it. So the mystics tell us that there are certain personalities who are the exact opposite of that. That means to say, not only was the fact that they come from a pedigree that they were not from Jewish stock originally and they had to convert, not a black mark against them, but in fact, on the contrary, these are people who, in spite of where they come from, they rose to the highest heights and they become the most incredible personalities in our history. Shemaiah and Avtalion are two of those. So we need to understand what this is. In order to understand it, we have to learn a principle about souls. It's a very, very fascinating principle. And that's why I don't know how much of the Mishnah we are actually going to cover today, because we first have to understand the personalities before we can understand the Mishnah. So when it comes to the story of souls, we're told that Arizal writes, of course, you probably know that Arizal is the leading expert on souls, soul families, soul journeys, reincarnation, and all that kind of thing. And Arizal wrote an entire book called Shar HaGilgulim, which is basically the story of reincarnation, how souls reincarnate, why they reincarnate, what the process entails, and so on and so forth. It's very fascinating to study. One of the things that he does in Shara Gilgulim is he gives us insight into certain personalities and the nature of their individual souls. For those people who know, Arizal had a student called Reb Chaim Vital. Reb Chaim Vital was like his main student. It's basically the person who recorded all of his teachings. And Reb Chaim Vital asked the Arizal, please could you tell me, what's the story of my soul? Where do I come from? Where was I in previous lives, etc.? And eventually, the Arizal eventually told him, but before he got to that point, he made him go through a year's worth of spiritual preparation in order to be able to be at the level where he could be privy to that information. So just in case you ever get excited, oh, I want to know who I was in a previous life, or maybe you meet somebody and they say, I can see into your soul, and you must have been so-and-so, don't take it with a pinch of salt. The leading authority in that realm said it takes a year's preparation before you could even begin the conversation. In any event, one of the things that the Arizal teaches us is this, that if you took all of our souls and you put them all together, they would comprise the spiritual equivalent of the human body. So just like in the human body, obviously there are many, many parts, many organs, many limbs, many veins, etc. And they all work together as a singular organism called the human body, and they have different roles to play. It's exactly the same with our souls. And certain souls are, in a sense, more integral to the system, and other souls are, if you want, the smaller components of the system. So certain souls have an influence over all of the souls that follow. For example, Moshe Rabbeinu, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, the great leaders of history. These are people who had critical souls. Their souls were not just about their own personal journey through life, but their souls impact all of us. And they touch all of us, and they influence us, and they inspire us, and they define us. Now, it's no surprise, obviously, to think that people like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov affected us. Obviously, I mean, they're our patriarchs and matriarchs. That's why we call them parents, fathers and mothers, because just like you will inherit certain things from your parents, so you inherit spiritually certain things from these personalities. It might, however, surprise you to know that there are other personalities whose souls have a very profound impact, and not only on Jewish souls. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are our patriarchs. They belong to us as the Jewish people. They influence us as the Jewish people. But there are other souls who influence the whole of humanity. So whose souls would you think influence the whole of humanity? Well, logic says they've got to be people who were early on in the story to have that impact on the whole of humanity. So nobody, I don't think, would be surprised if we said that Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, that their souls had an impact on all of humanity. It wouldn't be surprising to us. The Midrash, for example, tells us that Adam saw all of the souls of people that would live until the end of time, and he had an influence on certain people, and so on and so forth. It makes sense. He's the original. They're the originals, Adam and Chava. But here's what might be very surprising. The Arizal writes that Cain and Abel, their souls have an incredibly profound influence on every single soul that will live until the end of time. And if we look at the entire structure of all of the souls as a body, so he explains that Cain and Hevel are comparable to the two shoulders of that body. Now, this is very interesting because what is it that makes shoulders unique? Now, every part of the body obviously has a unique role. I mean, we know that, obviously, right? How many people think during the course of the day about the value of their shoulders? Yeah. As long as your eyes work, as long as your heart is beating, as long as we're Jewish, obviously, so as long as I have the capacity to eat, that's important. How many people rarely ever think much about the role of your shoulders? It's funny, right? So what is the role of shoulders? What do shoulders do that no other part of the body can do? Interesting question, right? Shoulders do something that no other part of the body can do. What is that? Rotation, right? That's what's unique about a shoulder, right? Shoulders rotate. Okay, big deal. Sounds very spiritual, right? Don't you think? Sounds very spiritual. We can rotate our shoulders. Shkoyach, thank you. Very nice. What does that mean? So the principle is this. The rotation of your shoulder allows your arm to reach all the way down, to grab something even from the floor, and to then lift it all the way up, even above your head. That's what a shoulder can do. And so the implication of shoulders in spiritual terms is that this is the part of the system that, if it's not guided, will go all the way down into the lowest realms, into the lowest behaviors. And if it is guided, will lift up all the way to the highest levels that anybody could reach. Based on that, the Arizal says that all of our souls either belong to the Cain camp, or to the Hevel, to the Abel camp. You can pretty much divide everybody of the whole of history into those two camps, which would be similar to the difference between the right and the left arm, a dominant arm and a weaker arm. Now, the difference between a dominant and weaker arm is obviously that if you had to pick something up, which hand are you going to use to pick something up? You're going to use your dominant, right? Because it's a stronger hand. That's typically what you're going to use. Even now, as I'm talking, I'm suddenly conscious of the fact that I'm using my right hand a lot to express myself, right? Because I'm right-handed, so that's what you do, dominant hand. So your dominant hand is the one that has the greater opportunity to lift. It's more powerful, it's more common to use, it's the one that's going to lift. That is what we call the Hevel shoulder. The Hevel shoulder is strong enough that it won't fall so badly, and it will be able to lift more easily. Whereas the Cain shoulder, that represents the weaker arm. So the weaker arm, in a sense, means it will fall more dramatically, But here's the chap. The chap is that anything that falls more dramatically always has the potential to bounce back more dramatically. They tell a story that there was once a young man living in the town of Liozna. Liozna was the town of the Alter Rebbe, Rebbe Shneur Zalman, the first Chabad Rebbe. And this kid was a rebel. And unfortunately, anybody who's had a rebellious child, it can be very, very difficult for the parents. And it ate his father up that he was a rebel. Now, in those days, what did it mean to be a rebel? He didn't have a Snapchat, and he didn't go out to jolling on a Saturday night. What exactly did you do to rebel in those days? So this particular young man, he had a very strong interest in horses. That became his hobby, was horses. So his father was devastated by the fact that his son, was wasting his life away with horses. He should be in the yeshiva learning. Now, he couldn't get anywhere with him. He couldn't get through to him. And of course, who dealt with horses was the local
If you
Russian
don't mind, I
peasants.
would actually mind if I could bring
In other words, it wasn't a very great environment to hang out. It wasn't a very healthy environment. So one thing led to another, and that involved the horses. Anyhow, so the father was most concerned. And he really wanted to take his son to the Alter Rebbe in order to get him to meet with the Alter Rebbe. Maybe the Alter Rebbe could speak some sense into him. And now the kid wasn't interested in going. And he tried this method and that method. Eventually, he came up with a ploy, and he got this boy into the Alter Rebbe's room. And now he had that much respect that obviously if he's standing face to face with the rabbi, he's not going to run out, even though he really did not want to be there. So the Alter Rebbe, he's waiting. He's bracing himself. He's going to get Musar now, and he's going to get over the head, and he's going to be told how bad he is and how secular he's become and how he's rejected the Torah. He's waiting. He's waiting for the storm. Alter Rebbe says to him, I believe that you're interested in horses. Okay. He was very surprised to hear this. So he says, yes, in fact, I am. He says, tell me about it. So the guy starts to tell him about this and that, this interest in that kind of horse and whatever. And eventually gets to the point where he boasts. He says, and I have the fastest horse in the whole region. So the Alter Rebbe says to him, are you not afraid? He says, why should I be afraid? He says, because if you have such a fast horse, what happens if you're galloping down wherever you're going and you take a wrong turn? And because your horse is so fast, by the time you realize that you've taken a wrong turn, you're going to be so lost. Maybe you'll never be able to find your way back. So this young man thought for a minute. He hadn't ever considered that before. He hadn't considered it. So he thought, and eventually he said, and it's much richer in Yiddish, he says, yes, aber as men chapt sich, but when I realize that I'm lost and I turn around, because I have such a fast horse, I'll get back to where I need to be quicker than anybody else. So the Alter Rebbe nodded his head and he said, as men chapt sich. In other words, but you have to realize you're lost. And then he said again, as men chapt sich. But you have to realize that you're lost. And then he said again, as men chapt sich. And at that point, the boy chapt sich. He realized that he was lost. And he decided to change his ways. So the strong horse, you rush off into all kinds of negative places. But if you turn around and you know how to redirect yourself, you rush back with the same kind of power and enthusiasm. That is what Arizal calls the Kayin souls. Kayin souls, they land up in terrible places, very unhealthy places. And the reason they land up in those places is because they've actually got a lot of potential and they can reach very great heights. But if it was easy for them to reach those great heights, then the world would be turned upside down. You'd have these wonderful, powerful, amazing souls just flying and influencing and inspiring, and everybody would be amazing. So Hashem creates a balance in the world, and he takes these very powerful souls and he locks them into places that initially are very impure places. So Shemaiah and Avtalion are very, very powerful souls. They were going to set the stage for what would eventually become the Mishnah. A little bit later on in history, not much later on, when Hillel becomes the leader of the Jewish people in Israel, one of the main reasons that he becomes the leader is because he was the person who could still recall the teachings of Shemaiah and Avtalion. And that becomes the basis of Torah. But where do they come from? They come from Sancherif. They come from a place that is a Kayin place. Look how bad it went. Look how far it went. Look how deeply entrenched in impurity it became. Their greatness was that they could pull themselves out of there and not be defined by their point of origin, not be defined by their circumstances, not be defined by their preceding generations, their ancestors, but they could generate within themselves this incredible power and drive to Kedusha, to holiness. Incidentally, that is one of the greatest achievements of the Torah. The goal of Torah is not only to influence the parts of the world that are pure already, or that are predisposed, or that are naturally inclined. The purpose of Torah is dafka, to touch the parts of the world that are by nature as far as you could possibly imagine from holiness. It's quite interesting. Everything is hashgacha pratis, nothing is by chance, it's divine providence that we should be studying this Mishnah, dafka, in the week that we're about to celebrate the holiday of Shavuos. Because there are two things about the holiday of Shavuos that speak exactly to this point. Number one, the fact that the Torah was given to us in a desert. Now, of course, most people tell you the Torah was given to us in a desert because it says very clearly in the Gemara that a desert has no owner. So nobody could claim that they are the sole owners of Torah. Torah is available to everybody and without exception. But there's another reason as well. The definition of a desert, according to Torah, there's a pasuk that says that a desert is makom asher lo yeshev adam sham. It's a place where no man can live. What we would call today, no man's land. What does it mean no man can live? Of course you can live in a desert. There's nomadic tribes who live in deserts. Can be done. What does it mean? It's not a place of habitat. Yes, you'll get your exception to the rule. Some groups of people who can live in the desert. By and large, it's not where people live. People have to live in an environment that has water, an environment that you can plant. That's where people belong. Now, Adam, the word Adam, yes, of course it means man. But Adam also refers to Hashem. We know the famous vision that the prophet Yechezkel had was Adam she'al hakisei. He saw the form of a man sitting on the divine throne. What we call in Kabbalah and Hasidus, Adam ha'elyon, the supernal man. So what's a desert? It's a place where there's no man. It's a place where there's no godliness. It's a place where there's no holiness. It is bereft of meaning. It is bereft of holiness. Why was the Torah given there? To teach you the power and the goal of Torah. The power and the goal of Torah is not only to influence we who are predisposed, we who do what, we're inclined. That's not the purpose. The purpose of Torah is to be able to have an impact on the world in its unfinished form, on the world in its ugly form. That's the purpose of Torah. The second thing that illustrates the same point is that we're told that when Hashem said, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha and Lo Yeh Lecha, the first of the two Aseres Adibros, the first two commandments, which incorporated within them all the other commandments, as Rashi says, something that the human ear is unable to hear. So it says in Parashas Va'eschanan, where the Torah repeats the story of the giving of the Torah, it says there that Kol Gadol V'Lo Yosaf, the sound that was announced, the sound of Hashem speaking at Mount Sinai, was a great voice that did not stop. One of the commentaries, what does it mean it did not stop? It filtered immediately into every spoken language. In other words, that the Torah is not only for us in Hebrew, us with Lashon HaKodesh, with a holy language, but the Torah is to impact the entire world as well. So this is the uniqueness of Shemaiah and Naphtali, that these are these people who had an impact on a Sancherev kind of a reality, to be able to elevate that part of the world to come close, not only to be part of the Jewish nation, but to be leadership within the Jewish nation. With that in mind, we can understand the first teaching that Shemaiah teaches. He says you should love work. And then he continues to Snois Harabonis that you should hate a position of power, which basically is saying is you should hate to have the position handed to you. By the way, have you noticed the theme? We've had a number of people already in this first chapter who keep saying, get away from leadership. Don't be a leader. Yeshua ben Prachya said it. We saw it a few times. Don't be a leader. That's not what you want to be. So likewise over here, you have the same feeling. Don't be a leader. Don't look for the opportunity to be a leader. If it's offered to you, great. But his first lesson is incredibly profound. His first lesson is Ehoiv es hamelocha. You should love work. What does that mean? Ehoiv es hamelocha. You should love work. Let's be honest. Do people love work? The Gemara uses an expression, avda behefkera nichale, that a person who is a slave would much rather be hefker, would much rather be without responsibilities. The Gemara uses that in a literal, halachic, legal framework, that if you have a person who's a slave, they would do anything in their power not to be a slave. However, in Torah language over the course of time, After behefkera nichele has become almost a comment on human psychology that eventually was translated into a bumper sticker. Remember, the old days used to be something called bumper stickers. So there used to be a bumper sticker that was called, they used to say, I would rather be playing golf. That's after behefkera nichele. I would rather not be working. Rather not be working. I suppose it's part of the huge debate right now, not so much in this country for different reasons, but in the United States, for example, the huge debate, open the economy or keep the lockdown. So many of the people who want to keep the lockdown, as it is already believed that it should be a welfare state, right? You should be providing for us. Who says that work is actually a value, right? We have needs, we have rights, you should provide for us. Whereas the other argument says that work is a value. The Midrash tells a story that when Hashem promised Abraham that he would give him this incredible portion, this incredible land that would be for him and his children ad olam forever. So Abraham went for a tour of the region. Torah says clearly he went up and down the countryside. And eventually the Midrash tells us he got to a place called Tzor, which is Tyre, eventually became Lebanon. And when Avraham Avinu got to this place called Tzor, he saw that the people there did not have a work ethic. They expected things to be given to them. They didn't have a work ethic. So Avraham immediately went to Hashem and he said, please Hashem, let this not be the portion for my children. A place that doesn't have a work ethic, not for us. So here comes Shemaiah and he says, you should love work. There's even a pasuk. Adam le'amol yulad. Man was born to work. What does that mean? Was Hashem some kind of a sadistic deity who says, you guys are going to work, you will only eat by the sweat of your brow and all this? Like, what is this? Nothing for nothing. So we have a principle, and it talks to the heart of what Judaism is all about. We have a principle which says, obviously, Hashem could do anything. Anything at all. They tell a story, I can't remember offhand who it was. One of the Tanoim, I don't remember offhand who it was, Rabbi Yossi, but one of the Rabbi Yossis, I don't remember. Anyhow, he was very, very, very poor. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel wanted him to be able to participate in some gathering of rabbis, whatever. But he was poor. His clothes were threadbare. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, I'll send you a nice cloak to wear so that you can come and participate in this gathering. I think it was Rabbi Yossi Bar Chalafta. I think that's it. So he says to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, he says, let me show you what's going on over here. He invites him into his house. His house was not exactly a house. There's a hole in the wall. And he had a little, almost like a mattress kind of thing that he used to sit on. And he pulls up the mattress, and underneath, as he pulls up the mattress, in front of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's eyes, a whole lot of gold coins appeared. And he says to him, if I needed, if I wanted, I could have money like this. Hashem would give it to me. But I don't see the value in that. What's the value in something which is given to you that you haven't worked for to achieve? Okay? Interesting concept. That is very much a Jewish concept. Hashem could do anything. What does it mean he could do anything? Hashem could have created a world without a Yetzer Hara. Ever thought about this? It's possible. He could have created a world without a Yetzer Hara, without temptation. You know how different life would be without temptation? He could have created a world where Gan Eden, the original Gan Eden, would be where we live until today. A wonderful place, revelation of godliness, a holy environment. Hashem speaks to you directly. And should there be anything which is untoward, you can tell straight away that it's a snake, so you don't go anywhere near it. It would have been fantastic, don't you think? If Hashem wanted to, he could have, when he took the Jews out of Egypt, that could have been the one and only exodus ever, and we would never have gone back into exile, into Golus ever again. He could have made Moshe Moshiach, we would have gone into Israel, and Shalom, that's it. It would have been great, happily ever after. If Hashem wanted to, he could have made it that every single morning, you get up in the morning and you say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Shenosan li parnasa, or something like that Hashem gave me livelihood. That's it. Your bank account would fill up. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I can imagine a lot of people who would love that concept. Your pantry would fill, your bank account would fill, your Your wardrobe would change every day. Oh, fantastic. I think some people believe that that's what Mashiach's going to be like. You know, we worked so hard, Mashiach's going to come, that we're going to just download clothes off the internet. It's going to manifest in our wardrobe, and it's going to be fine. Never have to cook a meal again. It's all just going to grow in the fridge. I don't know what people think. So the concept of melacha, of work, is described in the Zohar as follows. The Zohar says that you don't want to have nama de chisufa. You don't want to have the bread of shame. The bread of shame is where things are given to you and you have no sense of achievement. The way that Hashem created the world is that he wanted us, one of the explanations that's given why he created the world is lehetiv livruav. Because teva hatoiv lehetiv, the nature of someone who is good is to share goodness. Therefore, Hashem created a world lehetiv livruav, to share goodness with us. What does it mean to share goodness with us? You have a child. Do you want to share goodness with your child? Without a question. Obviously. What else do you want to do? Obviously, you want to share goodness with your child. So what does it mean share goodness with your child? So some people unfortunately misinterpret and think that to be good to my child means to give my child whatever they want, whenever they want, on their terms. We have a nice word for this in English. It's called spoiling. And the word is so apt. What does it mean to spoil your child? What does it mean? Because you're going to bring up a child who's going to be a brat? No, you're spoiling them because you rob them of the opportunity to achieve, to earn. The most incredible gift that you can give to a child is to say, if you do X and Y, you earn. Not because you want your child to be disciplined, because you don't want people to look at you askance and say your child is a terrible person. You want your child to earn because there's a value in earning, because it's a rich experience. Look at the difference between the person who wins the lottery or the person who builds a business from the bottom up. Winning the lottery is amazing until you win it. Not that I'm talking from experience, but that's what they say. They say that the vast majority of people who win the lottery, it ruins their life. They lose their friends because now everybody looks at them differently. They often move away from where they used to live because they can upgrade to a new house. And that's why they lose friends. There's family variables you can only imagine. They won so much money and all I got was whatever. But more than that, people who win money, there's a very high percentage that they don't land up keeping it. They land up spending and overspending and losing the money in a relatively short time. That's the sad story of winning the lottery. Why? Because if you don't work for something, you don't value it. That's what Shmaya is telling us. It's not saying you should work, you should have a job. You should love the principle of work. That every single thing that happens in your life, every single part of your Judaism, every part of your growth, every part of your development should be work. You should love the fact that you have the opportunity to work, to gain, to achieve, to invest. On a Friday night, we say, Vayichulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz, right? We say it as part of the Kiddush, but prior to that, we also say it as part of davening. And it says in the Gemara that anybody who says Vayichulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz na'aseh shutaf la'kadosh baruch hu b'maaseh bereishis. You become a partner with Hashem in the process of creation. You cannot become a partner in something without doing. So Hashem makes a world that is an unfinished world. And he makes people who are imperfect people so that they will constantly have something to work on. Love that. Love that. Embrace it. It's an unbelievable gift that Hashem has given us. The opportunity to be able to work, to earn, to achieve, and therefore to own and experience for ourselves. Therefore, he says, so hate a lifestyle where you are going to rise above other people, have some kind of privilege, be in some kind of special position. You should hate that. Because even if you have a role, even if you have been appointed by the community, even if you are now somebody who everybody else looks up to, That should never end your quest for malacha, to work. Because even in a position of greatness, there's still value in malacha, in working. Whether that position in greatness was something that you earned, whether it's something that you inherited, or whether it was just because of talents that are God-given that you happen to have. Therefore, he concludes, Va'al tisvada larashos. Now, there are many, many ways that he could have said the same thing. His message is, don't get too close to the government or to the leadership because maybe you think they're going to do things for you. No, no, no. Work for yourself. Don't rely on who your friends are in high places. You do the work yourself. But there are other ways that he could have said government. He specifically chose the word rashus. Why? Rashus is permission. One of the translations, the word rashus is permission. Al tizvada l'rashus. Don't get close to the voice in your head that gives you permission. Gives you permission to take it easy. Gives you permission to take shortcuts. Gives you permission to do things that you know you shouldn't be doing. Why? Because it's too difficult to resist. Don't listen to that voice. AKA the Yetzer Hara. The only reason you can achieve is because you have a Yetzer Hara. If you didn't have a Yetzer Hara, you wouldn't be able to achieve anything. You wouldn't be able to work. What would the work be? Everything would just fall into place. So don't listen to the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is only there to give you the chance to work. The Yetzer Hara is not there to actually give you advice. The Yetzer Hara has nothing to offer you that's going to make your life better. The only thing the Yetzer Hara can do for you is tell you something that you could fight against, so that there's malacha in your life. How apt for a person like Shemaiah, who comes from a background that nothing came easy, that nothing was naturally spiritual, that he doesn't have the yichus and he can't fall back on his grandfather, the rabbi, or on the lineage that he comes from. He comes from Sancherev. You can only imagine how much he understood and appreciated in personal terms that the only way you really achieve is you really have to work. Unfortunately, in today's world, where everybody believes much more in rights than they do in responsibilities, and where everybody believes that others should be inspiring them, and if it's not downloadable, it's not worth anything, then Shemaiah's message is incredibly, incredibly relevant and apt for us.